about a city owing billions on its electricity bill, it's easy to think of it as a simple accounting problem. A spreadsheet error, a payment that got lost in the mail. But when that city is Johannesburg, the economic heartbeat of an entire country, and the debt is over 5 billion rand, that is not an accounting problem. That is a systemic collapse waiting to happen. And this week, that collapse came into sharp focus. Eskom has issued a formal notice of intention to terminate or interrupt bulk electricity supply to the city of Johannesburg. Not a warning shot, not a polite request for payment, an actual threat to pull the plug on South Africa's wealthiest and most densely productive metropolitan area. The outstanding arrear debt sits at 5.2 billion rand. And that figure does not even include the current account payment of 1.58 billion rand due in early June of 2026. So we are talking about nearly 7 billion rand in total exposure, and the clock is ticking. But here is the thing, this dispute did not appear out of nowhere. It has been building for years, marked by allegations of overbilling, failed negotiations, and what National Treasury describes as a rapid deterioration in governance inside the city's administration. So let's go back to where this really started. Now we move to the history of the Eskom debt dispute. In November 2024, Eskom first issued a notice to interrupt supply. At that time, the debt was 4.9 billion rand. City Power, which manages electricity distribution for the municipality, contested the figure. They alleged that Eskom had overbilled them by 3.4 billion rand. That is a massive discrepancy. Nearly 3.5 billion rand difference between what Eskom said was owed and what the city believed was accurate. So the Minister of Electricity and Energy, Dr. Kego Siensho Ramagopa, stepped in. He appointed an independent body called the South African National Energy Development Institute, or SANEDI, to conduct an independent assessment of the disputed amounts. That was meant to be the solution, an impartial arbiter, a clear path forward. Instead, the process stalled. The SANEDI report was delivered 4 months late, and to this day, the findings have not been made public or shared with the key stakeholders. So, the city, Eskom, and the public have no idea what the independent assessment actually concluded. Now, Eskom has triggered the original action. They claim the city has failed to honor its supply agreement, and their public position is blunt. It is unacceptable for the rest of South Africa to carry the burden of Johannesburg's debt. But what happens if Eskom actually follows through? They have identified priority areas for potential supply interruption, including the Johannesburg CBD, Midrand, Cresta, and Menandi. Imagine a blackout in the central business district of the continent's most industrialized economy. That is not just an inconvenience, that is a national emergency. However, to understand how we got here, you have to look beyond the Eskom dispute itself. Because the debt to the power utility is just one piece of a much larger and more alarming financial picture. Now we move to the financial health of the city of Johannesburg. According to Statistics South Africa, Johannesburg has the highest debt-to-income ratio among all South African metros, sitting at 28%. To put that in perspective, the national municipal average is 14.1%, so the city is carrying twice the relative debt burden of an average municipality. And here is the crucial detail that often gets missed. That 28% figure only accounts for formal borrowings, things like loans and bonds. It excludes trade payables, which is exactly what the billions owed to Eskom are. If trade payables were included, the financial pressure would appear significantly higher. Now, National Treasury has been sounding alarms for months. In April 2026, Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana issued a formal warning to Mayor Dada Morero. The numbers he presented were stark. The city's total creditor debt had reached 25.2 billion rand. Meanwhile, available cash reserves had dwindled to just 3.9 billion rand. That means for every rand the city has in the bank, it owes more than 6 rand to creditors. That is not a liquidity problem, that is insolvency territory. But the warnings did not stop there. In March 2026, the Johannesburg Stock Exchange suspended the city's bonds. Why? Because the municipality failed to release its audited financial statements. Investors cannot buy your debt if you will not tell them how much debt you actually have. And then there is the wage dispute. The National Treasury has ordered the city to halt what it calls an illegally signed 10.3 billion rand wage agreement with the South African Municipal Workers Union. Treasury has warned that if the city does not comply, they may withhold the July 2026 equitable share grant. That is the money the national government gives municipalities to provide basic services to poor households. Withholding it would be catastrophic. So how has the city responded to all of this? Now we move to the executive response. Mayor Dada Morero has publicly dismissed claims of bankruptcy. He insists the city maintains an 87% revenue collection rate. He says it is capable of servicing loans and paying salaries. And despite Treasury's warning, he has stated that the city will continue to honor the contentious wage deal. There is a fundamental disagreement here. National Treasury looks at the balance sheet and sees the city on the brink of collapse. The mayor looks at operational metrics like collection rates and sees a functioning administration. Someone is wrong, and the electricity supply to millions of residents and thousands of businesses hangs in the balance. But Johannesburg is not alone in this crisis. It is part of a broader pattern. Now we move to the comparative municipal context. While Johannesburg's debt-to-income ratio is 28%, the other major metros show similar but less severe pressure. Tshwane sits at 20.5%, Ekurhuleni at 16.7%. All three are above the national average of 14.1%. And Johannesburg represents only a portion of Eskom's total arrears. Nationally, municipal debt to Eskom stood at 90 billion rand in September 2024. By January 2025, it had risen to 94.1 billion rand. Projections suggest it could reach 110 billion rand by March 2025. Eskom is now pursuing legal action under the Promotion of Administrative Justice Act against 14 other municipalities. Collectively, those municipalities owe more than 62 billion rand. So this is not a Johannesburg problem, it is a systemic feature of how municipalities across the country have been managing or failing to manage their obligations. So what are the actual risks here? Not hypotheticals, real immediate risks. Now we move to the impact. First, economic stability. Johannesburg is the nation's economic hub. Prolonged power interruptions in the city would not just affect residents turning on lights. It would hit business operations, supply chains, manufacturing, financial services, and national GDP. A blackout in Sandton or the CBD is not a local news story, it is a national economic shock. Second, Eskom's own sustainability. The utility has recently saved 26.9 billion rand in diesel costs, thanks to a period without load shedding. But that progress is undermined when municipalities refuse to pay for the power they actually use. Eskom cannot survive if its largest customers simply stop paying. Third, public service delivery. The depletion of cash reserves and the threat of withheld national grants jeopardizes the city's ability to provide basic daily services. Waste collection, water road maintenance, emergency services, all of these depend on a functioning municipal treasury. And fourth, administrative uncertainty. The Senedi report remains unpublished. The mayor and national treasury are publicly contradicting each other. The JSE has suspended the city's bonds, and residents and businesses have no clear answer to the most basic question: will the lights stay on? That uncertainty is not just frustrating, it is corrosive. Businesses cannot plan, investors cannot commit, and ordinary residents cannot budget for a future they cannot predict. Here is the bottom line. The City of Johannesburg is not facing a billing dispute, it is facing a governance crisis. The debt-to-income ratio, the withheld audited statements, the illegal wage deal, the stalled negotiations, the unpublished independent report. Each of these on its own is a warning sign. Together they are a diagnostic of systemic failure. Eskom may or may not pull the plug, but even if they do not, the underlying problem remains. A city that owes more than it can pay, that cannot produce audited financial statements, and that is publicly fighting with the National Treasury over basic fiscal discipline, is not a city that can deliver reliable services to its residents. The lights might stay on for now, but the warning signs are flashing red. And in Johannesburg, when the warning signs are ignored, the whole country feels the blackout.